Hello and welcome to Diplomacy and Discourse. I'm your host AR and I'm really glad that you're here today. We're diving into one of the most important and honestly one of the most fascinating topics in international relations. How do we actually build peace? Not just stop the shooting, but create conditions where people can live together, govern themselves, and move forward. Peacebuilding is not one thing. It's a whole toolkit. Diplomacy, mediation, peacekeeping, sanctions, cultural exchange, legal processes, grassroots organizing, and more. Some of these tools are centuries old. Others are brand new, powered by technology we couldn't have imagined a generation ago. In this episode, we're going to walk through the major approaches, ground them in real examples from around the world, and talk honestly about what works, what doesn't, and why. Whether you're a student, a policy wonk, or someone who just wants to understand the headlines better, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Let's start with the foundations. Diplomacy is the oldest tool in the peacekeeping toolkit, the art of negotiation and dialogue between representatives of states. When it works, it's extraordinary. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 is a textbook example. The world was genuinely on the edge of nuclear war. But through secret communications and intense back-channel negotiations, President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev reached a deal. Soviet missiles out of Cuba, American missiles quietly removed from Turkey, and a pledge not to invade. That crisis didn't just end. It reshaped how the world thought about crisis communication. It proved that even at the brink, talking can save us. But diplomacy doesn't always happen between heads of state. Sometimes it needs a neutral third party. And that's where mediation comes in. A mediator doesn't impose a solution. They create a space where both sides can actually hear each other. The Camp David Accords of 1978 remain one of the most powerful examples. U.S. President Jimmy Carter brought Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin together at Camp David for 13 days of intense talks. The result was a historic peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, two countries that had fought multiple wars. It wasn't perfect, and it was deeply controversial in the Arab world, but it held. Egypt and Israel have maintained peace for nearly 5 decades. Then there's arbitration, a more formal, legalistic approach where a neutral panel makes a binding decision. The 2016 ruling by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague on the South China Sea is a key example. The court ruled in favor of the Philippines, rejecting China's expansive territorial claims. China refused to accept the ruling, but the decision gave other countries a legal framework to push back on overreach. Arbitration doesn't always force compliance, but it creates norms and precedents that matter over time. These three, diplomacy, mediation, and arbitration, are the backbone of international conflict resolution. But the modern world has added many more layers. Let me bring this to the present, because peacekeeping isn't just history. It's unfolding in real time. The Middle East is currently the most active theater for high-stakes negotiations. There are at least 3 major diplomatic tracks running simultaneously. First, the Gaza peace process. After U.S. proposed a comprehensive 20-point peace plan in late 2025, the first phase achieved something significant. All hostages from the October 2023 attacks were returned in exchange for the release of 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. A military drawn down followed, and U.S. troops were deployed to monitor aid delivery. But the second phase, involving demilitarization and transitional governance, has stalled. Disagreements over Hamas's disarmament and the sequencing of withdrawals remain deep. A board of peace has been established with over $17 billion pledged for reconstruction, though actual needs may exceed $70 billion. Second, Israel and Lebanon entered direct U.S. brokered peace talks in April after renewed fighting with Hezbollah. A 10-day cessation of hostilities was agreed upon and has been extended, with the ambitious goal of disarming non-state armed groups, a challenge that has resisted resolution for decades. Third, the U.S. and Iran are engaged in direct negotiations mediated by Pakistan and Qatar, following a war that broke out in February and severely disrupted shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. has proposed ending its blockade and sanctions in exchange for limits on Iran's nuclear program. Iran has counter-demanded war conversations and wants nuclear issues deferred. It's a high-wire act where every word matters. What ties all three together is the top-down diplomatic model. A superpower uses its leverage to bring parties to the table, structures phased agreements, and ties security arrangements to economic packages. It's powerful, but fragile. Agreements hold only when the parties on the ground genuinely commit to hard compromises. Peacekeeping is one of the most visible tools of international conflict resolution. When we see blue-helmeted UN soldiers in a conflict zone, that's peacekeeping in action. But peacekeeping has evolved far beyond its original mission of simply separating combatants. The UN mission in Sierra Leone is a compelling example. After years of brutal civil war, UN peacekeepers helped disarm combatants, supported the transitional government, and helped restore basic order. It's widely considered one of the UN's success stories. Peacekeeping today often involves hybrid approaches. The African Union United Nations hybrid operation in Darfur, known as UNAMID, combined peacekeeping with mediation and humanitarian assistance. It wasn't perfect, but it demonstrated that complex crises often need blended responses rather than a single tool. The key lesson from decades of peacekeeping is this: separating fighters creates negative peace. The violence stops. But without addressing root causes, that peace is temporary. It's like putting a bandage on a wound without cleaning it. Eventually, the infection returns. That is why modern peacekeeping increasingly focuses on what comes after the ceasefire: governance support, rule of law, and community reconciliation. Sanctions are one of the international community's most debated tools. The idea is straightforward: impose economic costs to change a government's behavior. The sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program are a textbook case. Led by the U.S. and the EU, these sanctions significantly damaged Iran's economy and brought the country to the negotiating table, resulting in the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. That deal showed sanctions could work, but it also showed their limits. When the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA, the gains unraveled. And we're now watching new negotiations try to piece things back together. On the flip side, economic incentives can be just as powerful. After the Yugoslav wars, the European Union offered Western Balkan countries a clear path: implement democratic reforms, resolve your conflicts, and we'll offer you EU memberships and economic benefits. That prospect of integration, of joining a prosperous club, motivated genuine reform in several countries. It's a reminder that sometimes the carrot works better than the stick. One of the most encouraging stories in international peace building right now is happening in southern Philippines. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, BARMM, is preparing for its first ever parliamentary elections, scheduled for September. This is the culmination of the 2014 Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro, which ended decades of armed conflict between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. For years, the region has been governed by an appointed interim authority. The upcoming election represents something profound: the transition from a conflict-era power structure to a democratically elected government. Former combatants becoming candidates, weapons giving way to ballots. This road hasn't been smooth. There have been legal challenges before the Supreme Court, lingering mistrust, and concerns about localized violence. But a major joint effort by the Philippine government, the Elections Commission, and security forces is underway to ensure a safe and credible vote. This is what the long game of peace building looks like. It's not dramatic or headline grabbing. It's messy, bureaucratic, and full of setbacks. But it represents the most durable kind of peace. One built on institutions rather than strong men. Some of the most important peace-building work isn't about stopping current wars. It's about healing the damage from past ones. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid remains the gold standard. By giving both victims and perpetrators a platform to tell their stories, the TRC helped a nation confront its darkest chapter and begin, imperfectly but genuinely, to move forward. That model continues to inspire. South Korea relaunched its Truth and Reconciliation Commission in early 2026 to investigate state violence from the Korean War era, atrocities that happened over 70 years ago, but whose wounds still haven't fully healed. Finland published the final report of its Sami Truth and Reconciliation Commission, acknowledging the systematic mistreatment of the Sami indigenous people and sparking calls for a formal state apology. And in Canada, the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation continues preserving the testimony of residential school survivors, ensuring these stories aren't lost. These processes share a common insight. You cannot build a healthy future on a foundation of denial. The silence around historical injustice doesn't make the pain disappear. It just forces society to work around it. Truth commissions break that silence at a national level. Rwanda took a different but equally powerful approach through its Gakaka courts, community-based tribunals that processed hundreds of thousands of genocide cases. These courts weren't perfect by any legal standard, but they provided a form of justice and accountability that formal courts alone could never have delivered at that scale. The lesson here is that justice after conflict doesn't have to look the same everywhere. What matters is that it's genuine, that it centers the experiences of those who suffered, and that it creates a shared understanding of what happened and why. Peace building isn't just about negotiations and treaties anymore. The digital revolution has transformed how nations engage with each other and with global publics. Digital diplomacy, the use of technology to achieve foreign policy goals, has become an essential tool. Social media platforms are now primary channels for public diplomacy, crisis communication, and countering misinformation. Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example, has used platforms like X and Instagram to mobilize international support, share real-time information, and push back against disinformation campaigns. It's diplomacy at the speed of a tweet. But digital tools cut both ways. Misinformation spreads just as fast as truth. A poorly worded post by a diplomat can escalate a crisis. And the digital infrastructure itself, submarine data cables, tech hubs, satellite systems, has become a new arena of geopolitical competition. Over 70 countries have established diplomatic missions in Silicon Valley, recognizing that technology policy is now inseparable from foreign policy. Meanwhile, soft power, the ability to attract and persuade rather than coerce, continues to prove its value. The U.S. BridgeUSA program brings over 300,000 international visitors to the United States annually from 200 countries. The results speak for themselves. Over 90% of alumni report a more positive view of the United States after participating, and 1 in 3 current world leaders is an alumnus of a State Department exchange program. That's not just goodwill, that's strategic influence. Thailand is taking a different approach, leveraging its entertainment industry, globally popular television series, pop music, and film locations as soft power tools. Government-backed initiatives aim to turn cultural exports into both economic engines and diplomatic bridges. When millions of people around the world develop affection for a country's culture, it creates a reservoir of goodwill that diplomats can draw on. Cultural diplomacy won't stop a war, but it builds the kind of mutual understanding that makes wars less likely in the first place. We'd be doing a disservice if we only talked about successes. Peace building fails too, sometimes catastrophically. Afghanistan is the starkest example right now. The post-conflict transition after decades of international involvement has resulted in a systematic rollback of human rights, particularly for women and girls. Over 2 million girls and women have been excluded from secondary and university education. A decree came to light in early 2026 permitting husbands to beat their wives, providing it doesn't cause broken bones. The UN Human Rights Chief has described the situation as reminiscent of apartheid. Child marriage rates have climbed as economic desperation deepens. This is a painful reminder that peacebuilding doesn't end when foreign troops leave. Without sustained investment in governance, rights, and institutions, progress can be reversed in a matter of months. Colombia's Total Peace Initiative offers another cautionary lesson. President Petro's ambitious plan to negotiate simultaneously with all remaining armed groups succeeded in reducing direct clashes between state forces and insurgents, but it inadvertently created a power vacuum. Groups like the ELN exploited the reduction in military pressure to expand their territorial control and illicit economies. Intergroup violence actually increased, and civilian displacement rose. Public opinion turned against the strategy. The paradox is real. A policy designed to reduce violence can create new forms of insecurity if it doesn't account for the competitive dynamics between armed groups. Good intentions need robust verification mechanisms. Here's something that doesn't get enough attention. The best peacebuilding is often not about negotiations at all. It's about development. The Sustainable Development Goals represent a global recognition that poverty, inequality, lack of education, water scarcity, and climate change are not just development challenges. They are peace and security challenges. When people don't have clean water, when children can't go to schools, when families can't feed themselves, the conditions for conflict are ripe. The numbers are sobering. Nearly 2.3 billion people faced food insecurity recently. Over 2 billion people lack safely managed drinking water. 666 million people still don't have electricity. Global inequality saw its sharpest increase in decades during the pandemic. These aren't abstract statistics. They represent the daily reality for billions of people, and they are the soil in which the conflict grows. This is why peace-building practitioners increasingly talk about positive peace, not just the absence of violence, but the presence of the conditions that make violence unlikely. Functioning institutions, economic opportunity, social equity, and environmental sustainability. Addressing these root causes takes decades, not news cycles, but it's the most durable form of peace building there is. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Peace building requires the full toolkit. Diplomacy alone can't do it. Peacekeeping alone can't do it. Sanctions, elections, truth commissions, cultural exchange, none of them are sufficient on their own. The most successful peace-building efforts combined multiple approaches tailored to the specific conflict. The Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland combined direct negotiations with power-sharing arrangements, community reconciliation, and economic investment. Colombia's 2016 peace deal with the FARC included disarmament, mobilization, transitional justice through truth commissions, and rural development programs. The Dayton Accords in Bosnia created a complex political structure to ensure representation for three ethnic groups. Imperfect, but it stopped the killing and created space for something better. What these cases share is a recognition that peace is not a single event. It's a process, long, imperfect, and requiring constant attention. The signing ceremony makes the news. The decades of institution building that follow do not. But that's where peace actually lives. The field is also evolving. New actors are stepping up. Qatar, Turkey, and China are taking on more prominent mediation roles alongside traditional Western-led efforts. Regional organizations like the African Union are asserting ownership over continental conflicts. Grassroots organizations in Kenya, Nepal, and elsewhere are proving that bottom-up approaches can complement top-down diplomacy, and digital tools are creating new possibilities for transparency, communication, and citizen engagement. Let me leave you with this thought. Peacebuilding is not a glamorous work. It's slow, frustrating, and full of setbacks. The headlines focus on wars starting, not wars ending. We rarely celebrate the conflict that didn't happen, the crisis averted, the dialogue that quickly worked, the election that went smoothly in a place where bullets used to fly. But that work matters enormously. Every ceasefire that holds, every truth commission that gives voice to survivors, every election that replaces a gunman with a ballot box, these are victories for all of us. The world is messy and complicated, but it's also full of people, diplomats, mediators, community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens, working stubbornly and creatively to turn tensions into truces and truces into lasting peace. If you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice, opportunity, and the willingness to keep talking even when it's hard. Thank you for listening. If this episode meant something to you, share it with someone. Leave a review and send your thoughts to diplomacyandiscourse@gmail.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep building bridges.